Friends, it is always good to be at this conference, and it is wonderful to be invited back to address you again. Though, to be honest, with 11 business secretaries in 11 years, you probably don't get a chance to do too many repeat bookings, but I hope in the years that we've got to know each other, you know I am a true friend of manufacturing, that I understand it, that I support it, and crucially, that I am proud of it. And as I've said to you before, a large part of that is the significant manufacturing presence in my own constituency in Stalybridge and Hyde through companies like Stepan and the Hyde Group and Smurfit Kappa and Pilgrim Food Masters and others. And I want to thank you for the time that you've given me, for the expertise and the policy advice, for bringing together for me key sectors on specific challenges, and of course, for showing me around some fantastic businesses. I could not ask for a better relationship than the one I have with Stephen and Make UK, and I really do appreciate that. And I say this at the beginning because I know it still frustrates a lot of you, as it frustrates me, that some of the think tanks and commentators at times still, I think, lazily dismiss this sector as somehow being of the past or perhaps less relevant to a modern economy. They're wrong. I know that they're wrong. And I know this sector is integral to the UK, and its importance will only grow. And that isn't just my view, it's a view that is held throughout the Labour Party, from our affiliated unions, who many of you in this room work closely with, to the leader of the Labour Party himself. In fact, you may have even heard Keir mention on one or two occasions that his dad was a toolmaker. And that's because we know what this sector does for our constituents, our communities, and our families, and that, I think, is important. And I recognise your call for the manufacturing sector to grow as a percentage of GDP. I believe that ambition is the right one. It doesn't mean we ignore the service sector. Of course, we are proud of that too. But when I look around the world, I see other countries, I think, stealing a march on us, showing more ambition, with a better understanding, I think, of the new era we live in. And I don't understand why that isn't recognised more in the UK. A thriving and successful manufacturing base is central to improving our growth and our productivity performance. It is key to net zero. And it's also key to what used to be called, or might still be called, levelling up. And the last few years have shown it is also key to national security. So what I want to talk to you about today is how we're going to go for that growth, what that means in practice for key manufacturing sectors, and how we need to do even more together to make sure that we get it right. And that starts with the number one thing businesses ask me for, which is stability. It's something which has been sorely lacking over the last few years. And when I talk to people around the world, I'm afraid this is also what they tell me. Too many changes of policy. No long-term consistency. And some moments, such as the Liz Truss mini-budget, intensely damaging and actually quite embarrassing. And this isn't how it has to be. It isn't how you would run your businesses, and it need not be how the country is run. And Labour has heard your calls for stability loud and clear. When I first spoke at this conference 2 years ago, I promised you an industrial strategy. And that is what we have delivered, and it is one that is built to last. We will put into law an Industrial Strategy Council, so it is a real independent institution and not just a government committee. It will bring business and government and trade unions together to work on the issues we're running out of time to get right, with sector deals drawn up by industry to give you the coordination and the consistency you need. You can already read our plans for the automotive and life sciences sectors, showing you exactly what we intend to do. And my promise to you is an industrial strategy that is more than a PDF. It's something the whole government are signed up to, and it will act as the guiding principle in delivering the mission-led government that Keir Starmer has outlined. And Rachel and I are absolutely clear. We will have a Treasury and a business department finally united in delivering that industrial strategy. And we know you need stability when it comes to the tax system as well. It's amazing, but there have been 26 changes to the corporation tax regime in this Parliament alone. And there are many reasons why we have the lowest business investment in the G7, but this is one of them. When Rachel addressed this conference last year, she announced her review of business taxation, and she has now delivered the tax certainty she said she wanted. We will cap the current rate of corporation tax for the duration of the next Parliament and will maintain full expensing. But that will be subject to a competitiveness lock, so to ensure that should other G7 countries cut their main rate, we will then act accordingly to remain competitive. And that means businesses can plan investment projects today with the confidence of knowing how their returns will be taxed for the rest of this decade. And I know, having won the argument on full expensing, Make UK is keen to look at areas like leasing, so that incentives genuinely match how modern business operates. And we will always be willing to engage with you in that work. We want to give you the tools you need to bring the new projects to Britain with the new jobs and opportunities our communities are crying out for. But I also want to be clear. Stability and certainty does not mean an absence of ambition to do better. Because where we are now, with our per capita GDP figures very poor indeed, with our exports struggling, with our productivity stagnant, of course that is not good enough. You know, with all the talent we have in this country, with the innovative businesses I get to see every day, some of whom are genuinely the most productive in the world and on the cutting edge of research and development, I think, why then are we looking at such anemic growth? You know, why are living standards going backwards? Why are people paying high levels of tax, but their services aren't what they should be? And as we look ahead to the budget, I know the Chancellor will claim we've turned a corner. But be honest, turning that corner increasingly feels like parking up in a cul-de-sac and hoping for the best. I believe we need a step change in our performance. And that can only come from a government with the ambition to do better. And the good jobs, sustained growth and productivity increase we need will only come if we harness the power of Britain's makers. So let me give you an example of what that ambition looks like for one of the bedrocks of our manufacturing sector, which is steel. I said very publicly, the decision of this Conservative government to hand over £500 million of taxpayers' money to make thousands of people redundant in Port Talbot, that is a bad deal. It's bad for those workers, it's bad for taxpayers, it's bad for industry. And look, there is no way the transition to net zero will succeed if it looks like this. The politics of net zero, it's not about imaginary meat taxes or made-up claims about 7 bins. It's whether the transition is just and fair and it delivers something for Britain's workers. And the government's plans so far are none of those things. And I have real concerns that by the end of this Parliament, we could be the first developed nation to be without the ability to make primary steel. So we're going to bring forward our promised investment in steel, committing £3 billion to develop green steel within the first 5 years of a Labour government. And when it comes to another jewel in the crown of our industrial base, the automotive industry, our plans will accelerate domestic battery-making capacity, creating 80,000 jobs. We're going to remove planning barriers to get shovels in the ground. We're going to inspire consumer confidence by fixing the charging infrastructure. And we're going to bolster our supply chain resilience with 10-year research and development funding arrangements. This is how you support our most valuable exported good, with real action that improves the total business environment, not moving targets around in an attempt to chase headlines. But we also know the whole of the manufacturing sector needs a government focused on addressing the challenges they face. And that's why we'll address the skills shortages many of you are so worried about. We'll reform the apprenticeship levy, giving you greater flexibility over how it is spent. We will establish Skills England to ensure technical excellence colleges are delivering the courses that meet the needs of your sector. And many of you have told me repeatedly that it is too hard to build something in this country, and that the premises you need or the ability to get the additional capacity you need is held up by a planning system that blocks you rather than backs you. So Labour's going to take on planning reform. We're going to streamline the process for national infrastructure projects and commercial development, and we're going to remove the veto used by big landowners to stop shovels hitting the ground. And our manufacturers are, of course, some of our best placed exporters, with nearly £400 billion of goods exported every year. And I know many of you feel frustrated with the trade frictions you are experiencing, and that is why, again, working with business, we've convened a task force to look at the practical steps the government could take to remove those physical barriers facing exporters. And we'll go further. Because under Labour, our trade strategy will work hand in glove with our industrial strategy, securing vital market access in key areas and supporting manufacturing through targeted actions like seeking critical minerals agreements. And we'll take the grown-up approach to Brexit this government has lacked. We're not going to be seeking to rejoin the single market or the customs union or to reopen the wounds of the past. But it is right that we get a better deal for Britain's manufacturers and for the rest of the economy. Because even with the additions of the Windsor framework and the reassociation with Horizon, there are real improvements we could achieve. That includes a veterinary agreement, it includes mutual recognition of professional qualifications, and of course touring rights for the creative industries. And finally, much has been written recently of Labour's Green Prosperity Plan, but I want to state clearly, our Green Prosperity Plan remains a central part of our mission to grow the economy and deliver clean power, and it will be a central plank of our manifesto. Our National Wealth Fund, co-investing in green hydrogen and carbon capture and clean steel and renewable-ready ports and gigafactories, will be the catalytic public investment you have told me is needed to unlock the far greater amount of private investment that is out there. Our Warm Homes Plan, more ambitious and bigger than anything that has ever been done before on fuel poverty and energy efficiency. And our British Jobs Bonus, paying more to those firms who build their supply chain and the jobs that creates here in the UK. So we will once again see the manufacturing sector at the heart of national renewal, creating 500,000 good, well-paid jobs and securing our future and freeing us from reliance on dictators and fossil fuels. That is what Labour is offering. Stability, ambition, and the concrete plans to make it a reality. An industrial strategy that is in statute, a predictable and competitive corporation tax regime, tackling skills shortages, planning barriers, trade frustrations, and unleashing the potential of the transition with a National Wealth Fund to provide catalytic public investment. An ambitious plan to back those who build it in Britain. And I hope in the plans that I've laid out, you've heard your concerns and your ideas reflected back at you, because this has been a true partnership and one that I hope we can continue into the general election and beyond. When one of your products leaves a factory, it goes through quality control, looking at every aspect, perfecting every process, hammering out the imperfections. And it's that same skill, your critical eye and your innovative thinking that I hope you will apply to the Labour Party in the coming months, to work with us to quality control our plans, to smooth the edges and ensure it all works as it should. I don't know when the general election will be, and I can't know what the outcome of it will be. But I do know, if I get the chance to be the business secretary, I will honestly be the greatest friend and ally in government that you will ever have had, because I genuinely believe that together we can deliver the bright future our country so desperately needs, and we can rebuild a Britain that we can all be proud to say we have worked on. Thank you very much for the chance to come back and talk to you again today.
The last time you were here, was it Kwasi Kwarteng who was on the stage?
I can't even remember all of them, if I'm being honest, but I think it was me and Kwasi.
2 years ago, wasn't it? Yeah. There we are. I know you're going to take some questions from the delegates, and there's a couple of media questions first, and it's Matt Oliver from The Telegraph who has the first one.
Hi there, thanks very much for taking our questions. There's a lot of concern about the coming arrival of low-price, state-subsidised Chinese electric vehicles and the damage that could do to Britain and Europe's car industry and their various supply chains. The EU's launched a subsidies investigation and the United States has warned China against dumping. How might a Labour government respond to that problem? And just very quickly as well, I know you support the shift to net zero, but the current setup is generating a lot of paperwork related to ESG for small firms, including manufacturers in this room. Some have been sent 300 question surveys. Do you worry that this has gone too far and it's hurting productivity? Thank you.
So 2 pretty substantial questions there, Matt. Thank you very much for those. Look, on the Chinese EVs, yes, I do welcome what has been announced, what I've seen in the papers this morning. I am concerned about this. I think there are key, we talk a lot about net zero, about the jobs of the future. There are some sectors where I look at just the sheer overcapacity that's coming out of China, and I worry And I'm concerned that that, to me, is inconsistent with how a healthy market economy, global market economy, should operate. So we've got to be aware of that. We've got to have heed to that. And I say repeatedly that for me, decarbonisation can't be about deindustrialisation. It can't be about outsourcing all of our emissions, because actually, of course, in many cases, the footprint overall on a global level would go up if we did that. And getting particularly support of a community like mine that I represent in Parliament for net zero requires getting that right. So I think we've got to be, of course, always signed up to a rules-based, trade-based international order. There are huge benefits of that. And I often point to the fact that I think you can have these concerns and support that. If you look, for instance, at the US, which has an incredibly sort of assertive measures now in relation to some key Chinese sectors, they've also got bilateral trade between the US and China at record levels. So it is possible to have both objectives as part of that, but I think it is very important. And on your ESG question, I mean, look, let's just be clear, the public want this. The public want, as consumers, the transition to happen, and they want the right information around there. I do have some concerns about the sort of taxonomy that underpins some of the ESG classifications and the balance between the ES and the G and how to make that consistent. I think that's got to be done with industry to get it right. I think that the direction of travel has been the right one. But what the public want is consistency, and they want that to be in a way which, genuinely gives them the information as consumers that they want. And I think we've got to always make sure we're getting that balance right. I think in some areas it is quite onerous, but I think fundamentally we've got to recognise we must work together to this consistent position. And I think broadly what has happened with industry around that has been quite a positive thing so far.
Okay, Doc. Second question we've got from Graham Langtree from Political. Not sure where Graham's sitting actually. Oh, there we go.
Hey, Johnny. UK-Canada trade negotiations have broken down recently, creating a rules of origin cliff edge for many British manufacturing exporters. What would a Labour government do to ensure British manufacturers can continue to export to Canada? And additionally, I'll just ask the question again. Do you think the government should follow the EU and open a probe into Chinese state electric vehicle subsidies?
Yeah, thanks, Graham. I mean, the Canadian position is hugely concerning. We've had a little bit of an issue in Parliament with some of the information the Secretary of State gave at the dispatch box and then what the response was from the other party in that. I mean, to state the obvious, we need those talks to be up and running. We need those talks to be happening if we're going to solve this problem. It's obviously principally an issue about the automotive sector, also for cheese actually as well. But there's a lot of money at stake here. It's a huge priority. And of course, to be in a position where we are in a detrimental position relative to what we had under our membership of the customs union is a significant problem. So I think the only way we'll resolve that is by reinstating those talks. I think actually the Canadians are here at Make UK conference today, and I think that is possible. I think particularly for the automotive sector, it is a pressing concern. We should also say as well, I mean, crucially important as this is, it's got to again be part of a trade strategy that is linked to our industrial strategy. And for me, we've seen some very welcome investments in the automotive sector. We all, I think, recognise the scale of that. But we've got to be tackling things like the lack of consumer information, the concerns that exist about range, the need to stimulate a secondary market as well in those vehicles. And at times I look at some of the things the government announced on trade and some of the ad hoc announcements on industry. I just don't feel there's a comprehensive strategy there, Graham, and that is a huge concern. And so your second question was about the EU. Is that right? I've noted down here. Sorry, could you give me your second one again, Graham? I've talked too long on the first one there.
It was about the dumping again. It was about the
the dumping question, yes. I mean, look, in any of these discussions, Graham, we're going to have a position that, of course, takes into account what is happening in the US and what is happening in the EU. That will affect us, the decisions that they make. And I, again, going back to my answer I gave to Matt, I share the concerns that exist. I think where there is a concern that we're not facing free and fair and healthy competition, we're right to use trade remedies as an answer to that, to do the formal investigation. I think some of these questions are, yes, they're technical in terms of the assessment of that, but there is a strong kind of political element to these as well, and we've got to be frank and see why that is necessary. But, I want a strong trading relationship with China where that is in our mutual interest, but there are more sensitive sectors, and you can't simply treat China like you would, for instance, the US or a European partner. That's just a fact of life. And so where those concerns exist, yes, I think we've got to see those investigations, and we've got to do that in the way we already have set up in our existing trade remedies regime.
And final media question from Lucy White from Bloomberg. Brilliant. I'll just get a mic over to you.
Hiya.
Over there.
All right.
Hello. I don't know if you were in the room earlier when there was a show of hands around Brexit, and the number of people who thought it wasn't going very well was incredibly large, and the number of people who would be in favour of rejoining the customs union who thought that would be good for business was incredibly large. You've committed to not rejoining the single market or the customs union. Do you not think that now is the time, given the position that you're in, to be a little more radical? And also on workers' rights, you've committed to banning 0 hours contracts. I'm sure there's businesses in this room that do use 0 hours contracts. Given the sort of labour shortages and staffing shortages that we've seen since Brexit, is that a good idea?
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Lucy. So let's take the first of your two tricky questions with Brexit to begin with. Look, I do think our policy is right. I genuinely do, and I voted Remain, and my constituency voted Leave, and I had all the difficulties of that and all those indicative votes in that process. And if my views haven't changed on the fundamental proposition that we were offered at that time, and I feel a sense of times of some of the claims that were made and then the reality which was always there. It's a source of frustration, and many people will have those as well. It is wrong, even though I understand why people do it, to pitch it to Labour as, look, you're ahead in the polls, you can be braver or be more politically radical. Because go back to the first point I made in the speech, Lucy, about stability. Right? That is what we really need. We need to give a clear message that the UK is a more competitive and open economy under a change of government, if that happens, but also that the dramas of the last few years, frequent prime ministers, frequent referendums, frequent general elections, you don't need to worry about that. We've got a solid footing for the future. And reopening the whole question, you can't then say you're going to provide stability. You can't. You've got to recognise that, because there are many different views on this, and that's why it ended up the way it did. You've got a very kind of libertarian idea of Brexit. You've got a very kind of big state view of Brexit. You've got, again, on the Remain side, different views of what that would be. The argument could go on forever. And I think looking at the practical trade-based improvements that could be made, rather than those bigger constitutional questions, is the way to deliver stability, but also an improvement. And of course, for so many sectors, particularly represented in this room, Brexit is not just about how you leave the European Union. It's about how you will manage divergence in future. The European Union will go off and do its own thing. How do we tell our businesses about that? How do we signpost? How do we prepare them? There's still a lot to do around that. And I don't think revisiting the whole thing genuinely would give the country what is required. But I think we can improve it, address some of those concerns, deal with it in a good faith way. I think most of all, if I'm being honest, dealing with Brexit and the politics of the European Union in a way which isn't governed by the internal politics of the Conservative Party would be a big help in itself. And that is the plan, even though I understand people will quite rightly still feel strongly, and many people in this room have incurred significant cost and significant difficulty, and we've got to respect and understand that. And on the point of the workers' rights point, the New Deal for working people, look, we're for good jobs, right? That's what we want. And most of the people, the majority, nearly everyone in this room, is a business that provides those good jobs. And I know that because my own constituency is built on the kinds of jobs that the people in this room represent. We do think there are too many people in the UK that are facing insecure work. The kind of changes we're proposing, for instance, on 0 hours, about effectively having a right to your usual number of hours worked, again, something which exists in a lot of other European countries. I don't think that substantially is to the detriment of the businesses in this room. I don't think, for instance, saying that what we saw, which is very much a minority of businesses would ever even think of doing this with the fire and rehire scandal on the ferries. Businesses in this room, they don't want to be competing on that basis. And I think addressing some of those issues in the labour market, many of which are actually more about the gig economy and a level playing field for businesses operating in the gig economy, is a really important thing to do. And I think a country which is providing a much stronger sort of pitch around investment and competitiveness and bases that on good, secure work, working in partnership with business, that is the kind of long-term improvement to productivity and growth and people's living standards that everyone in this room wants to see.
Okie dokie. Can I just ask you on that about jobs? What you think? We were talking earlier about artificial intelligence. What that could hopefully lead to a lot of prosperity. There's lots to talk about it being the next industrial revolution, but there's probably going to be a very a short-term impact on jobs. What's the Labour Party's thinking in terms of AI and how that might impact.
Absolutely, Steph. The impact is going to be profound. I think we can see that already. And I understand why people have, concerns. There's definitely going to be a need. I mean, we're already worried for this upcoming general election about what might happen in terms of, false impressions and deepfakes and all of this kind of stuff. So there are, but I think if you go back to that point of what is at the core of the problem we all want to see improved? UK is a low business investment country. It has terrible productivity performance, and we've got to get that right to get growth better. AI could surely, on that productivity point, really be a positive force. And of course, you get the regulatory environment necessary to do that. But I think we've got to approach it with that kind of optimistic spirit. And I think we've got to say, already, yes, there are, I've been told examples, again, some of the businesses in this room, of how it is already displacing, some existing jobs and working patterns. But you have this about every wave of technology.
Yeah.
The Luddites and the mills in my constituency. It's always about actually how we can have a more productive economy if we do that in the right way, and something for working people out of it is obviously integral to our plans. It's a story which is more positive overall. So it's like let's approach it with that positivity, and let's talk about how it could be used in the right way to fix some of the problems we've got in the UK.
Okay, let's take some questions from the delegates now. We've got a hand up here. And then lady at the front, if you want to get the mic down to there for me as well. Yes.
Thank you. Mark Shortland, I'm just here, sorry.
Sorry, can someone...
Just the lights are a bit... It's hard
the
to
lights
see
is
you.
actually quite
No, I understand. Founder of a company called Choplight, who are a certified B Corporation. Is it part of your party's policy to enact the Better Business Act, which would give an equal footing to the environment, local communities, and workers' rights combined with those of other stakeholders?
Great question. Do you take three or do you want
Do you know, crack on? And then
Okay, brilliant. That's a fantastic question, thank you. Look, on the B Corp movement and the Better Business Act, I really admire what I see in what is being put forward. I worry a little bit if done in isolation, it might not look like a comprehensive agenda, and to be honest, I think I've said this before at this conference, I think if you want to be the business secretary, you don't want to look like you're preaching to businesses about how they should be run, because they know how to do that better than us, but you are trying to provide the tools that are necessary to do that. And on the corporate governance picture more widely, we've been doing a lot of work because we are keen to see the audit reform process completed. Obviously, the government have announced a draft bill, but we haven't seen that yet. That's part of our agenda. And this wider set of proposals, particularly around things like directors' duties, I'm really keen on, but I haven't finished and formalised our views on it yet, because I think there's got to be a question about how do you make that meaningful, but in a way which isn't too onerous for businesses. So we talk to a lot of people, but having a movement like that with the objectives and the noble aspirations and the delivery of those things is a huge asset to me. And so we'll continue that conversation to make sure we're getting it right. Again, don't be accused of preaching to people, don't be accused of tokenism, but I absolutely recognise the positive role that business plays across the whole country. I think the B Corp movement is fundamentally about putting that front and centre, and that's a really important message to get out.
Question at the front here.
Thank you. I'm Delphine Rudeli. I represent CMET. We are the European Employers Organization for the Manufacturing Industry, and Make UK is a very active member of ours. I just had a question on the net zero transition. It's a very important topic, as you can imagine, in Brussels as well, and for all our members. But you rightly also called it the just and fair transition. When it was put out in Europe, the Vice President of the European Commission at the time, Mr. Timmermans, said that no workers should be left aside on this. But we were very critical about that because, of course, you can make promises to the citizens. The question is how you make sure that the promises are kept. Yeah. And for us as an industry, of course, we don't deny the importance of this net zero transition, and we are working very hard. All our companies are working very hard for that. The question is how you make sure that the social and the employment impact is limited and mitigated. In Europe, at least in the European Union, no measures have been taken, and there was no anticipation whatsoever when the full set of legislation was put in place. So everything was thrown on the table, companies were left with that, everything has to be implemented now, before 2030, and no one took care of how this was going to impact companies and their workers, by the way, because we were closely hand in hand. So my question is, you mentioned as one solution the fact that we needed to work on skills, because obviously this is one of the topics on which there will be a major impact. And one of the solutions you mentioned is the fact that you want to have a reform of the apprenticeship levy. I think it's very positive. I mean, I will let Make UK comment on that. But for me, the way I see it, this is a medium-term reply.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of time to train an apprenticeship to enter a company. We now need short-term reply. So I'm coming here with a question and a request for inspiration. Is there anything we can do now? Because our companies, they need replies now in order to be able to mitigate the impact of all this net zero transition on them socially in terms of employment, and to find the brightly skilled people that they need now and in 2, 3, 5 years. And the replies that we need, the solution that we need to find is really for today and in 6 months and not in 3 years or 5 years. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. Look, I think this will be, again, whoever wins the election, I think this will be one of the dominant and major themes in British politics for the next 10 years or more. And I think we'll see that reflected, to be honest, in most countries. And let me just be specific about what I mean. Look, if I went to my constituents who elect me and I said, this business that you've worked for, that your parents work for maybe as well, it's been such a big role in our community, it's going under, and because you're going to have to compete with competitors around the world whose emissions profile is actually higher, but they've not got the same kind of laws in place that we haven't got the same level of ambition, and that basically we're going to hit those targets, our ambition on net zero, by just shutting things down and outsourcing, the emissions, which in practice would actually increase them, but on an accounting level would fix it. That's not going to work, and that's what I mean when I saw the Prime Minister here doing a made-up meat taxes thing. That's not a thing. This is the really difficult bit, and it's going to be really hard. How do we do it? The absolute brilliance of your question. Well, look, the key policy tools here will be things like the carbon price, which obviously has a differential here to the rest of Europe. It will be around things like carbon border adjustment mechanisms, and again, what happens in Europe will have a huge impact on us. There's also a massive issue here in the UK still on industrial energy prices. The government have this supercharger policy. I think we might need to go beyond that, and that's something we're looking at very, very closely. But it's that proper competitive environment, I suppose a level playing field in a way. And again, there will of course be disruption. There will be a need to retrain and reskill people. That's just part of life. But what we don't want is what a lot of people in a lot of places, again, that I've grown up or represent now still feel, which is when the UK has done this in the past, these big transitions. I mean, when I was growing up in Sunderland, it was mining and shipbuilding that the economy was based on. Of course, that was going to change, but how did we manage that transition? Well, honestly, not very well. And levelling up, which is a key government policy, kind of reflects the fact we're still talking about some of the problems. So we've got to do it better. We've got to learn those lessons. And that will be about things like skills and retraining, but it is also about how we manage that level of ambition. And for me, ambition on net zero is getting it right. It's not about doing it the quickest or necessarily even the cheapest. And that is a really important bit. And I think, again, maybe political arguments lag a little bit at times around that, but getting it right, I think that's what it looks like.
You mentioned the north there, and obviously, I'm from the north as you are. I still live up in the northeast, and the infrastructure is such a big problem in terms of skills and levelling up and things like that. Is that going to be a focus as well? Because,
absolutely.
Tracy mentioned transport in the north.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, obviously, where I have lived and represented in my adult life, which is Tameside on the east side of Manchester, it's got the major Transpennine line running through. I mean, it is a major problem. You should be able to work in not just Leeds or Manchester, but Liverpool or Sheffield or actually in Hull, and that's a major infrastructure need. And it's not right, but goodness me, Greater Manchester compared to the northeast where I grew up is again a totally different thing. Now, look, there are major spending pressures on whoever forms the next election. I mean, you look at the government spending plans as they stand, whatever comes out of the budget, and there's a major need for investment. Now, our fiscal rules actually are a bit tighter on the day-to-day, but give us more scope for investment. But it will not be easy, Steph. I mean, there are competing priorities. You've got to get back to this point. What do we need more than anything else? We need this kind of step change to say the problems of the past are in the past. The level of attractiveness of the UK, the pragmatism, the desire to make things a better business environment is there, and people recognise that. And we see that, as soon as you get those growth projections up from where they're at, there's a lot more you can do. But there is no doubt, again, why are we a low investment, low productivity economy? Well, part of the answer is that people just can't get to where they need to do. And I often say that we've got a lot of problems that need fixing, but if we started off building enough houses for people and a transport system that got you around the north of England, I wonder how far we would get on that.
I know, it could make a big difference. Brian, I know you've got a quick question, haven't you? And then we'll wrap things up.
Very quick, if I may. Brian Holliday, Siemens Digital Industries. Thank you for your kind words of support for the sector. You and I had the pleasure of meeting with Arden Dyes last year, a small firm in Greater Manchester that had benefited from a Made Smarter grant. Could we assume that an incoming Labour government would meet with Make UK's call for the ongoing Made Smarter initiative to help our small to medium manufacturers?
Yeah, Brian, look, thank you for your question. Thank you for your support and the relationship that we have. I'm a big fan of Made Smarter. Again, I can point to things in my constituency that's made the difference on. And look, I know I've given up trying to get the government to ever use the words industrial strategy, but we obviously now have an advanced manufacturing plan. And I like many of the things in there, but the challenge for us all, friends, is not just about the cutting edge sectors, the advanced manufacturing areas, and the brilliance of those, so that's important. We've got to get all of manufacturing, invested in, more digitised, more automated, and Made Smarter for me is a genuine programme where I talk to the people who invented it and I talk to the businesses who've used it, and it's the same story, and I like that, and I think how we do more of that, more digitisation, more automation across the entire sector, that will be a priority for me.
I was about to wrap things up, but I'm getting the eye from Stephen, which means he wants to try and get one more question. Isn't it funny how much your life has changed from a few years ago when you were here to now, because everyone thinks you're about to get in? Get the questions in now!
It's always been pretty friendly here, to be honest. I would imagine.
I'll be very quick. Jo Milligan from JFG Alliance. We're the owners of Liberty Steel and Albans Aluminium, two foundational industries. Very pleased, Minister Ghani and yourself, Johnny, obviously stressing the importance of foundation materials. Labour have set out a pledge for £3 billion towards clean steel in the UK. One of the key problems actually for foundation industries in the UK is the supply chain and the capability throughout the value chain. How do you intend to try and address some of those capability gaps in the UK for the net zero economy, which is outstripping the rest of the economy in the UK right now, according to the CPI this morning?
Very good. Joe, thank you again for your question, and thank you again for the support and the relationship that we have as well. I mean, look, this is obviously a huge issue. Probably I'll talk out the session if I go into it in too much detail. But look, on a whole range of these things, even with the government's existing plans that have been put forward, this is the question, is the scrap supply going to be sufficient to manage? How are we going to do that equitably? How are we going to stop people just vertically integrating and getting their share around it? Look, we've talked specifically in the industrial strategy that we published around what Rachel sometimes calls securonomics, but how supply chain resilience, how what we've seen in the pandemic and the invasion of Ukraine has had to have an impact in terms of how all businesses look at this. And we think a lot, what's the role of government within that? Clearly businesses themselves are making decisions about supply chains and don't really need government to be part of that. But I think we have to know where the risks are. We have to give support where we think there's a genuine strategic weakness that needs to be addressed. It's not a free lunch. Businesses themselves will do a lot of this work, but I think we've seen in the past, not just on the obvious areas of vulnerability, but I mean, look how the energy crisis has shut down the fertilizer plants, and then you see that coming through in food prices. I mean, this is the sort of thing we've got to recognise, got to reduce those risks over time. And I think, look, on the energy crisis that we've had, there's going to be no easy answer when you see the price shoot up as it did after that invasion. But the role for government in that is to minimise that exposure over time. I don't really see that from the government, to be honest, in terms of what they're putting forward. But that is, again, the kind of the partnership we think it is legitimate and right for an industrial strategy working across all of government to deliver, working in partnership with business.
Excellent, thanks. Can I ask you one tiny thing before you go?
Is it a football question?
No, it's not football related. How are you actually feeling knowing like everyone thinks you're going to get in? Do you feel like, how do you, because it just keeps the pressure now. Like, are you shitting yourself?
Honestly, this is the most tricky thing in interview, is always the last question that can easily catch you out as you relax. Look, I mean, let me say, first of all, I've been a Member of Parliament for my area for 14 years now. I've done a lot more general elections than I thought was coming my way when I was elected in 2010. I would obviously like a different sort of experience to the one I've had when the exit poll has hit traditionally. But look, I think you take the responsibility seriously. I think I've seen a lot of people, if I'm being honest, on other political parties in my time that have won elections, whether that's Boris Johnson or Nicola Sturgeon, Have they made the most of the success they've won that night when they won the election? No, actually, it's ended quite badly in a lot of cases. Now, I think what you can do now is if you prepare properly, not complacently, but properly, you can put yourself in a better position around that. And of course, one thing that would be very different, I've never been in government. Me, other shadow cabinet colleagues have had that experience. I think some of the relationships we've genuinely built up over quite a few years now, this organisation is a good example. That can only be an asset, can't it? When you've got the civil service, and if you end up in that position, being able to bring up people or bring up businesses you visited and say, what's this really looking like for all of you? And I take that very seriously, and I suppose the famous Labour phrase that John Smith gave about the chance to serve, that's how we feel.
Yeah,
the chance
that was
to serve
definitely
is
a
what
politician's answer.
It was, yeah.
Put your hands together for Jonathan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.